folks. Happy Friday and welcome to the Freedom from the Press podcast. My name is Jason Robertson. I'm here with my partner in crime,
Todd Peterson. Jason, you can't tell looking behind me, but I'm in a brand new studio and it looks just as blank as before.
Yeah, we're going to have to start a GoFundMe so Todd can get like a constitution or something behind. I got all this clutter, and
organized clutter. No, your office looks great. No, folks, thanks for joining us today. Doing things a little bit differently on Freedom from the Press. We are actually coming to you in a pre-recorded video because Jason and I are doing a little traveling to the free state of Florida.
Yeah, and so just to kind of frame this up, folks. So part of our mission on Freedom from the Press is how do we break through the media narrative and show Americans that our government hates us and they're doing everything they can to make our lives awful while making themselves horribly wealthy. And we've been creating our own content on our American Tribune properties and Freedom from the Press podcast. Todd's going to be launching his daily show or a couple times a week show. But we're going to be working with an organization, Our Country, Our Choice, and Republic. And these are organizations that are designed, they tend to have MAGA values. I'll be full disclosure, where they think big government's bad. They think, all these wars are bad. They want voting protections, all that stuff. But their goal is to connect with Americans on both sides of the aisle, because the only hope we have for America is if all Democrats aren't fully brainwashed.
Yeah, Jason, perfectly said. It's interesting how you pointed out that there seems to be an alignment with MAGA principles. Setting politics aside, you have to be America first, and America first is associated with Donald Trump now, but really just America first means I want a secure border, I want secure elections, I want limited government, I just want to be able to do what's best for me and my family. I don't want to worry about school systems transing my kid or the state taking away my kid from me if I don't affirm their identity. This is just what it means to be America first now. And yes, Donald Trump's capturing that. And honestly, when we look at RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard joining Team Trump in this election, there's something to be said about that. It is either Donald Trump or bust. But like you said, Jason, this is a nonpartisan effort to unite Republicans and Democrats, and the Republican Party has sold out conservatives. The Democrat Party has sold out traditional liberals. We need to come together in a new group to take our country back.
Yeah, and just to look historically, countries that don't put their own sovereignty first, the health and well-being of their citizens, their effectiveness of their military to defend themselves, their economic principles, those countries wither and die. Because the fact of the matter is, you can't be the world savior. Just like you yourself in your own personal budget, you can't solve all your neighbors' problems. You can't do that. They have to. As a nation, we need to take care of our nation, our family first. And we need to be selective for who we let in to make sure they share our overall values. And for us to get there, the powers that be continue to separate us on right and left. If you're right, you're a far right extremist. If you're left, you're a crazy Democrat that wants to kill babies, which is largely true. But what we have to do is how do we break through the brainwashing of these people on the left and get them to understand that their party is what the Republican Party was, 20, 30 years ago. It's the party of corporations, of forever wars, owned by big business. And they're creating this unsustainable culture for us where if we don't wake those people up, it's going to be bad. And that's why we're going to really ask you, share this content, especially with somebody that you don't politically agree with.
Yeah, this message, like you said, Jason, we need to have the Democrat awakening, just like Donald Trump, when he came down the escalator in 2016, gave Republicans their awakening. We realized how corrupt the GOP, the establishment Republican Party was. We knew it. We had an inkling, but it was always the lesser of two evils. But now we just saw right through that. We said that they're part of the establishment uniparty. Donald Trump woke up Republican voters, conservative voters, and now there's a divide between rhinos and America first. If Democrats don't have the same kind of awakening where they look at their leaders and say, these represent none of my values, I don't want to be in wars forever, I don't want to be taxed to death, I don't want to murder babies after they're out of the birth canal. If they don't do that, though, Jason, I'm afraid we lose this country, because this is half of the American voting public.
Well, it is, and it's funny. I remember growing up. I grew up in a conservative area, farm country. They're like, give me freedom or give me death, right to bear arms, all that. And they voted Republican. I'd be like, why are you supporting the Bushes and Cheneys and all these awful people? The Republican Party was comprised of country club elites, investment bankers, and warmongers. And all they want to do is take poor white trash like me, send me to die in some godforsaken desert so that they could get rich selling weapons and on the back end with the oil and all that stuff. And Democrats agreed. Democrats were like, yeah, these guys are corrupt. But now they failed to see the hypocrisy of their party. And that's really, I think Todd's picked some great videos to show how that's evolved and what it is we need to do to help break through this.
Yeah, and Jason, I think her name, I just want to make a Minnesota reference here before we dive into the videos. I might get this wrong. I think it was Cindy Sheehan. If you remember her, she was from the suburbs of Minneapolis. I remember her going down to Bush's ranch in the mid-2000s. She was there protesting the Iraq war, the Afghanistan war. And at the time, you're like, oh, look at these crazy leftist lunatics. In hindsight, you're like, thank God that people were protesting that war. We had millions of people killed in the Middle East, thousands of American soldiers, young men and women that needlessly died for oil. And then you look around and you say, well, where are the Sheehans today as we're sending billions of dollars to Ukraine? We're watching millions of ethnic Ukrainians and Russians get slaughtered, civilians, soldiers alike. But you realize, wait a second, the president that woman was protesting, his vice president now endorsed Kamala Harris, and like, they just don't care anymore. Like, what has happened? I keep asking, what has happened to the Democrat Party? The people they protested 20 years ago, they are going to vote for enthusiastically, and Bush and Harris are the same politician, the same person, but because there's a D, you've got half this country that thinks, oh, no, it's a Democrat. It's okay now.
It's crazy. And Dick Cheney was Satan. And it's funny. I tweeted out the other day pictures of all the people that have endorsed Kamala Harris. It's the Cheneys, it's the Bushes, it's the Union for the IRS. It's all the big business CEOs, all the people that would be your traditional awful Republicans are endorsing Kamala Harris, and they're like, "Hey, look, this is great," and it's remarkable. And the first video and story we're going to cover is this kid, and I got to say, Todd, if you look at your values next to God, what's the single most important thing for you?
Family. Without doubt, family. How is that not everyone's number one priority, Jason?
Right. And the left has had this march towards disintegrating the family, and this is really the epitome of it.
You to work again, turn in your father.
Well, the tip actually came in from before January 6th. My dad was getting way more radicalized as time went on, following Trump and isolating himself more and more, and it was terrifying.
What were some of the signs you saw?
He was watching all sorts of media that was terrifying. He isolated himself to online groups that were far-right, radical, and he was growing more and more violent, not to just the family, but to the people around him, and it scared me.
And then when you saw it January 6th, how soon after did you realize your father was involved and that you had to act further?
It was while they were pointing guns at the doors of the house.
You saw him there?
He was texting my mom and FaceTiming her, and it was delusional.
And did you have any hesitation about going further? I mean, he is your father, but as you say, you saw him there with guns, and prosecutors said he lit the match of January 6th.
Of course. It was the hardest decision I've ever made, and it continues to haunt me to this day. But, I don't regret it, and I still feel for him and my family.
I still can't believe that this is a real story, Jason.
I got to say, your dad thinks the government's corrupt. Your dad thinks the election's stolen. And let's be honest. Whatever you think about the 2020 election, there were hundreds of anomalies that were never investigated, that were never proven. If our government wanted to convince us that election was legit, they could have at least saw evidence, presented evidence that nothing fishy went on. And this kid's dad was worried about it. It was during COVID, where he probably thought government was oppressive and doing awful things. And this young man turned his dad into the FBI.
Such a ridiculous thing to say out loud. Folks, we are at the point where the government has indoctrinated your children to the point that they will turn you in to spend your life in prison. This kid's family is now the government. He has sold out his biological father to spend the rest of his life in jail because he is such a good person. Jason, did you hear how concerned he was? My father supported Donald Trump. That was his reason for initiating this. He started to support Donald Trump, and then he joined online groups, and he read media, the media that we keep getting warned about that needs to be censored. Kamala Harris says that Elon Musk has lost his privilege. Hillary Clinton and AOC say we need to do a better job of monitoring online discourse.
It's insane, Todd. And I mean, full disclosure, Todd and I were talking before the podcast. You know, what would it take for you to turn your family members in? And if you think this kid was radicalized before January 6th, what was his dad consuming that made him so concerned, other than this poor young man being brainwashed by the media and the left to think it was awful? And then they're talking about, you know, the guns pointed at the house on January 6th. Todd, I've watched all kinds of January 6th. I've seen some guns pointed at the house, but it was from Michael Byrd towards protesters.
There was only one gunshot victim on January 6th.
Right. Yeah, and it was not...
I seem to recall that there were no fire. Jason, I'm going to say allegedly because I don't know, when we're on certain social media networks that don't appreciate our thought, even though we're wrong. And we pointed out how if you're a Democrat, you can post stuff that is wrong every single day. Nothing happens to your accounts. I don't recall any firearms being present that day. Weren't there a lot of memes out there about this is the first unarmed attempt to overthrow the government?
Yeah, it's interesting because if you go through all the court documents and stuff, you know, you have hundreds of thousands of people in Washington, D.C., and you have a handful of guns scattered throughout. And I got to say, whenever I talk to somebody about this, I tell them, go to your local biker bar this weekend and just walk through it and look to see how many guns there are in that bar. I guarantee you that will be more guns than were on the property of the White House and the House building and all the buildings in DC on January 6th. And it's funny because you argue with the left, so they'll be like, oh no, they found guns. There was like 4. And it's like, you're going to overthrow the government with 4 guns?
Know 99% of the folks at that rally probably have or practice the Second Amendment. They've got their firearms in safes at home, probably multiple weapons, rounds of ammunition. Do you think if American patriots with that cash wanted to do something about the government's role in the election or wanted to overthrow it, do you think they would have left that at home? Is this a serious... And Jason, I think we're getting into the realm of we can't talk about anymore about this on Facebook, but again, it's so stupid. It is all so stupid. And you and I were talking too, this kid is getting paraded out there, and we've got a clip as well because he's getting interviewed. You can see on the chyron below in that clip, Fatherland, new off-Broadway play. They're putting this kid out there to set an example. Hey guys, if your parents support Donald Trump, let us know. Let the federal government know. Let the FBI know. Send them a tip so that they can come arrest your parents as well, because it's evil and it's vile to support Donald Trump, and he's a threat to democracy.
You know, Todd, and I'm trying to think, do we have any examples of where the government encouraged their kids to turn in their parents or their neighbors to turn in their neighbors and how that turned out?
You know, you can look back at China's revolution, the Soviet Union's revolution. I pulled up a quote here. I couldn't remember the names, but I reread 1984 every couple of years to be like, how true is this? If you recall, there's a character in the book, the Parson family, Mr. Parson, Mrs. Parson, enthusiastic supporters of Big Brother. But one day their kid hears them say something that's out of line, and little girl turns in dad, Mr. Parsons, to the government. And he's glad that she did because he raised such a good communist. He's happy to go to jail now and get re-educated. That's the point we're at in the story too. Every single thing Orwell wrote about, it's coming true in real life. We now have kids in America turning in their parents.
Right. And we won't go through the videos today, but we've shown videos before on the podcast, them talking about they need to unbrainwash MAGA or send them to camps or retrain them. So, folks, here's our challenge to you. How do we reach kids like this? How do we unbrainwash them? How do we get them to say, you know what, turning in your parents to a totalitarian government, this is bad.
It's not like they opt somebody. And Jason, you and I even said, like, I don't even know if I would let the local law enforcement know about something to that extent. Like, we're not even at that level. We're just talking about political differences in your family. And that was enough for this kid to turn his dad in.
Unbelievable.
I actually haven't watched this. Do you want to watch a clip of the play, though, Jason? And just to see the dialogue and narrative?
Oh, yeah.
I'm learning about this the same time our audience is.
There and the sick should be locked up for the rest of their lives. Everyone.
Are you recording this?
What?
Are you recording this?
No! I am not recording.
You better not be. Don't betray me. Don't ruin this family. Do not put this family in jeopardy.
I am not the one that is putting our family in jeopardy.
If you cross a line here, I will do my duty. I will have no other choice. Choose a side! Choose a side or die! I put you in this world. I can take you out. Don't turn your back on me!
I'm not turning my back!
Whoever turns his back on me is a traitor! Is that what's happening here? If you turn me in, you are a traitor. And traitors get shot.
Jason, what are the odds that that's how it went down? Like 0%?
I was going to say, it's like, are you kidding me? Like, what kind of fantasy world does this poor deranged kid live in that his dad is some ranting lunatic? I can't even.
He was going to pull a gun out on his kid? Like, that definitely didn't happen. But of course, you look at the kid here. He's got the greasy long hair. Has he ever seen the sun before? Like, he's such a pasty-looking dude, just not healthy-looking, kind of doughy. It would make sense that his portrayer on Broadway was a little bit more masculine-looking, even though he had that stupid earring and super emotional. Like, I would expect a child of the left to be emotional like that. All of this is stupid, but it's frightening, Jason. More than stupid, it is very scary because they're trying to normalize kids turning in their parents. Like, I don't think people appreciate how profound of a moment this is in American history when kids will be doing this regularly.
And what was his dad protesting? His dad was protesting what he feels is a corrupt government. Now, I got to say, I'm 50. In my time, I have seen plenty of government corruption. I have seen plenty of things that should have mobilized people. I've seen civil liberties stomped on. I've seen freedom of speech, right to bear arms. I've seen the government rack up $35 trillion in debt. If you have disputes with the government, I think some of them are well-founded.
Yeah. And, you even think back to the lefties protesting, let's just say Vietnam. This is before my time, but how many families got turned like, oh, you support the Vietnam War? You don't support the Vietnam War? Let me turn you into the federal government. Like, that isn't even a thought process that would have taken place before, but we are so far moved from just a normal time where you could have disagreements, you could still go protest, but the level of rhetoric applied to Donald Trump and Donald Trump supporters, this was the only conclusion, Jason. We've talked about how calling Trump certain names and making accusations against him could only lead to one eventual outcome, and we've seen it twice. When you say things now about Trump's supporters and network and the people that support him, I see no other conclusion to reach as well, other than that this will keep happening.
Well, yeah, and think of the hundreds of thousands and millions of people that protested in D.C. for various things and demanded change from their government or accountability from their government. Imagine if we would have had people turning in their kids. Well, actually, I might be making their parents. I might be making the argument for it. We wouldn't be here today because this left-wing radical ideology would have been stopped because conservatives let them protest, let them throw their fits, and now here we are.
Yeah. But Jason, the theme of the show here, we're talking about them dividing the country. Nothing better exemplifies the divide they're creating than trying to break up the family. But take a listen to this. This was caught on, and folks, I want to set this up. These are videos I pulled just from today. We're pre-recording on Tuesday. I pulled these from my Twitter feed just today as a few examples of things that are dividing this country. And what's most frightening about that realization is that this is every day. I could have pulled clips from Monday. I could pull clips tomorrow. Had we recorded tomorrow, I would have found the same examples of constant over and over iterations of them trying to divide us. But listen to what's happening on MSNBC. This is the framework of the election, according to Joy Reid and Jen Psaki.
It is calculated, right? I mean, Donald Trump isn't just a doddering fool who happens to be racist. He's a calculated person who is not trying to grow his vote share. He's trying to speak into the id of a particular kind of voter about when he says we have to call out Detroit, Philly, and Atlanta. We have to go into Philly, Detroit, Atlanta. He lost Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Michigan in 2020, which is how he lost the election. It's why he's under indictment for attempting to steal those races. What he's telling his voters, his small, his share of extreme MAGA voters, these blacks are stealing the election. Black Haitians are violent cannibals. Black people are the enemy. Black people are going to be responsible if and when I lose, and you are permitted through my language to do violence to them if necessary to stop another peaceful transfer of power, because he understands that he is not winning the election.
Deep breath. Folks, this is the discourse on the left. Joy Reid is not fringe. Joy Reid is mainstream. She is on MSNBC, consumed by, even one is too many, but countless people are watching this and they learn from her. They listen to her and they take that out and they vote based on what they listen to.
What I love is just the outright declaration that Trump and his supporters are extremists, they're racist, they're the most vile people. He's using racist language. I mean, the fact of the matter is the town she talks about in Pennsylvania, in Georgia, I remember weird election shenanigans. I remember pipe bursts. I remember vote counting stopping. I remember people taping, sheets on windows so you couldn't see vote audits. I remember all that weird stuff. And as a voter, I'm like, this is weird. Somebody needs to explain this to me. And now to say that is racist and to lump in the Haitians. We covered this 2 episodes ago. We did a deep dive into Springfield and Haiti. Go check out the Rumble only part. Haitians are living in a less than third world nation. And when you move those and drop them into Midwest America, you're not going to suddenly civilize them overnight. And so you're conflating all this stuff, but you are othering. And I got to say, this language is terrifyingly similar to what was used in Germany. People like to call Trump Hitler, but theirs is the side that is demonizing the other, calling them all these awful things and blaming them for all their problems.
Yeah, no one had racialized what happened in 2020 in major Democrat-run cities in swing states. Nobody racialized that. We said these are Democrat-run cities. Jason, I looked it up. Do you know when Atlanta had a Republican mayor last?
Oh my God.
I think it was 1890. Like, you can't even fathom how long ago that is. These are Democrat strongholds. Yes, they have large black populations. That is in part why they are Democrats, because Jason, 95% of the black community will vote Democrat even as they watch their nuclear families get gutted and crime take over the communities. Oh, vote for Democrat, because Joy Reid told me that Donald Trump and Republicans are racist again. Nobody had racialized this. Those cities have huge populations run by Democrats, and there were questions about the veracity of some of the results. But now in 2024, and again, this has been going on for countless years, the divide in America along racial lines, it is disgusting. It is reaching its crescendo. Joy Reid telling you that if you question the election results, now not only are you a conspiracy theorist, but you're a racist, and that might be worse.
And this is an important point to make. If our government, if our people in power really wanted you to believe in the veracity of these things, they would have explained what happened. They would have said, here were the anomalies. We really dug into it. This is what we found. But it was within a couple days of the election, everybody uniformly declares there's no fraud. Where's your proof? It's the most secure election ever. And the fact of the matter is, I mean, we've had Trump assassins now for 4 weeks that we have no answers on, 5 weeks. And you're telling me millions of anomalies across a bunch of states. We can declare almost immediately that there's no issue. We did a thorough investigation, and we still don't have an answer to a Trump assassination attempt.
Jason, it's interesting, as I was making my rebuttal of Joy Reid making it a racial thing, like even MSNBC and the Chiron, they say, makes basic claims of election cheating in Democrat-led cities. Yes, that is the point. They are Democrat-led cities. But Joy Reid spouting her hate. This is a woman filled with hate. She hates you, Jason. She hates me. She hates this country. I don't even know why she's talking to Jen Psaki. Psaki's a white woman. Nothing about this is racialized. But of course, the Haiti thing, like, it could be Amazonians that are South American or mestizo. It could have been white hunter-gatherers that we imported here. If anyone is eating pets, that is a problem. But they always have to play the race card. No one is dividing this country along racial lines more than Democrats. They are the party of racists, the party of racism. As Thomas Sowell says, it would be dead if not for being on life support by ignorant fools like Joy Reid.
Oh, these people make me angry. But you know, that kid in our first video, he watches this, he consumes this, and this is his worldview. And we've got to figure out how to reach him.
Yeah, but we're not even done. We are... I guess I'm going to laugh, Jason, because I don't know how else to respond to this. I feel like let's just listen to this without context. And viewers, again, this is MSNBC. This is actual discourse. This is an actual guest saying this. He's not joking. He's not making a mockery of anything. He actually believes this.
Donald Trump got in 2020. So it took historic numbers to beat him. Right? And so now we get enamored with the Dick Cheneys and the Liz Cheneys and the Flakes and the da-da-da-da, right? And this man is running around here busting his chops, scaring the hell out of communities, right? And we're trying to figure out how to keep that middle, locked in on her when she needs to bust him in his mouth. I'm saying it like that because he's dangerous. He's dangerous to particular people. And the history of the country is such that we can't play fast and loose with it. Fast and loose with it. Does that make sense?
Isn't it incumbent on all?
Jason, we just dropped the middle of this speech in the podcast. Do you have any idea what he's talking about? Like, this is just the ramblings of a lunatic.
Well, and how many times does he say dangerous, threat? Todd, Donald Trump was president for 4 years.
4 years.
Am I correct on that?
Yeah, 4 years from inauguration to the leaving of the White House. You got it.
Okay, how many people did he target with the DOJ? Did he unjustly lock up?
Not enough is the answer to that question, but
yeah, I believe the answer is zero.
Zero.
I mean, from what people have said, other than a couple terrorists, I don't believe anybody lost their lives. None of these claims have happened. None of these things even were remotely close to happening.
We had an election that he walked away from. They keep talking about peaceful transfer of power. Jason, correct my memory if I'm wrong, but he flew out on an airplane the morning of Biden's inauguration down to Mar-a-Lago.
Yep.
And Joe Biden became president. If that's not a peaceful transfer of power and honoring our democratic traditions, which we could talk about our democracy in a separate episode. Like, what is? He came, he presided, people lived their lives under a booming economy, and he left when Joe Biden was inaugurated. That's it. That is the end of the story.
And we've got to think this lunatic on the show, this is a mainstream show watched by millions of people. You just sit there, you're eating your dinner, you're having your lunch, and you grab your lunch and you turn on the news, and this is what you consume. These people are poison to the country. You talk about othering others, and this guy would be completely okay if Donald Trump were locked up. He would be.
He wants to punch him in the mouth,
right? And this isn't like, oh, they want things bad for the country. This guy is out there inciting violence against Trump and his supporters, but he's doing it because he's the good guy.
We're only halfway through.
Well, that's to protect the people who are endangered by him.
But you never have. That's the rub. You never have. And so part of what we have to do in the midst of this is to engage in a deep-seated political calculus, right? Even though we know that she has to get the middle, we got to come out and try to figure out how to turn out in large historic numbers, because we got to keep this troglodyte out of office. Because if he comes in, our babies are going to be in danger. Because remember, those young children are going to grow up with the memory of having to not go to school for the threat of bombs.
I gotta say, anytime a Democrat says the babies are in danger, I'm just like, can we get a fact check?
You want a fact check, Jason? 62 million babies since Roe in 1973.
Right.
Well, yeah, the babies are in danger under Donald Trump.
And how many school shootings or things in schools have happened under Democrat leadership? But here's the thing too, Todd. As you investigate all those, is it right-wing MAGA Republican kids going to shoot up schools?
I seem to remember some high-profile cases in Nashville. I believe the student identified as a trans individual. You've got examples in Colorado where non-binaries were shooting up clubs. I know a lot of things got memory hold. Remember that case in Texas when a young black man shot a few people in school and the judge let him go home for a birthday party?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the school violence problem is because we have mentally ill young people that consume content like this guy's spouting, and we tell them the world's ending because of climate change and all the other terrifying tactics. And these poor kids, they become that kid in the first clip that are just so utterly devoid of anything that
we have no perspective of the value of human life. If you just assume that you can other and dehumanize and belittle anyone that disagrees with you politically, that's how we end up here. That's how you're able to shoot other kids when you're a kid, because you don't see them as a person. You see them as an enemy. That's exactly what's happening here.
It's funny you say that. So Harry Stisson, who's one of those Twitter left-wing young guys, like I watched part of one of his streams the other day, and he was talking about how he doesn't assign moral value to a baby until it's 20 to 24 weeks old. And I'm thinking to myself, like, I remember we just had our first grandbaby. She's about a month old. I remember when we got our first ultrasound at 4 weeks, at 6 weeks. And that was a baby to us. Like, we assign moral value to that, and to actually say like, oh, that thing is nothing I mean, even if you think you should be able to abort it, but to assign no moral value to that, to the unborn child before X number of weeks, these people are demonic.
I tell the same story, Jason, but it's worth repeating. We get new audience members every week. Maybe one day my sister-in-law will listen to the show. She is a devout leftist, public educator, believes all of it. We got a picture of a pee test at 6 weeks because she showed us the little blue line. How are you excited about a blue line if that's not a human being? What does that blue line mean to you? I know your daughter-in-law went through the same progression of it's not a baby to suddenly like, apparently it is a baby. But your daughter-in-law woke up. My sister-in-law said, hey, we're having a baby at 6 weeks because this represents a baby inside me. And then as soon as that baby comes out, go on, other women, and, your body, your choice. Make it make sense, folks. If you're excited about the birth test, the little pee strip, tell me why it's okay to then murder them. And Jason, the other interesting thing is I was kind of doing my deep dive on, I don't even know if I can say the show title on Facebook. That's how bad it is. We'll be Rumble only, X only. Did you know that Roe, they're so excited about Roe, and it's interesting you mentioned Sisson's claim about viability. It's not a baby with 24 weeks. When they say they want to go back to Roe only allowed you to do it up until viability. That's the rub here. All these folks are pissed off. They're like, oh, I can't kill my baby at 9 months. Like, Roe didn't even say that. They're so misinformed on what Roe actually meant. Roe's limit was viability, medical viability at least. And then after that, states could regulate it. They have no idea.
No, and that's part of what our challenge is. How do we educate the leftists that when you see content like this guy is spitting out, that your brain, like all warning signals in your brain needs to go off this is bad. This is bad for America. We shouldn't let this be normal.
And somebody told them that their moms and dads eat cats. They eat cats and dogs.
Not just anyone's mom and dad. Specifically, a group of people flown here by the Biden administration and dropped into rural red communities that did not want them, cannot support them, and are watching their neighborhoods be destroyed forever. Just certain communities. Not every mom and dad is eating cats and dogs.
I'll get myself together, Claire.
Okay, take a minute. Deep breath.
And he started crying, if you didn't catch that.
Oh my gosh, these people are living like there's real concerns that are destroying this nation. We're about to see World War III launched in the Middle East. We have the starting of World War III in Russia, Ukraine. We have $35 trillion in debt. We spend $1 trillion in interest.
Borders wide open.
Right. Yeah.
If reports are to believe, tens of thousands of convicted murderers into our country now, thanks to the border situation.
And you're crying about some imaginary boogeyman that they're going to lock up black people. And I can't even make it make sense, Todd.
He had 4 years to do that. And instead, he did, what was it, First Step? He actually released incarcerated black men. He did the opposite of what they're talking about.
Right.
Do you think if Donald Trump, not knowing if he would ever get a second term, would have enacted all of his programs and policies in that first term just to make sure? Was he like hanging on by a thread? Like, I might lose in 2020. I might lose again in 2024. But just in case I come back to the White House, then I'll do all these bad things.
Right. All these things I didn't do in my first term that are really radical things. That's what I'm going to do in my second term. This doesn't make any sense.
And I know I played the clip without context because if you're just listening to this individual, all he's doing is going on this unhinged rant about nothing. He says that Kamala's concerned about the babies, and we're trying to protect the babies by making sure Donald Trump, this would-be dictator, doesn't have a chance to come in and hurt black and brown communities. Like, what?
And this is the rhetoric that we need to stop. And that's part of this mission that Todd and I are going on later this week when we're heading down to Florida. Todd, do you want to kind of talk about Republic, what we're hoping to accomplish, hopefully what videos we're going to have?
Absolutely. Yeah. So Republic, Jason, you kind of talked about it at the start of the show. This is an organization that is trying to bring Americans together. And I mean, I'll equate it for a second with like RFK and Tulsi Gabbard joining Team Trump. You have two people that a year ago, 2 years ago, 4 years ago, like these people would not have joined forces, but to Tulsi and RFK's credit, they woke up and they realized the real threat is coming from the communist left. It's the communist left versus everybody else that loves this country. And so Republic's trying to do the same thing. They're trying to bring like-minded individuals who value what is written in the Constitution, who value limited government, who want to be left alone by the government. And we're not talking like the left alone, like let a woman murder her baby left alone, because that's not an actual thing. We want the baby to be left alone from their mother. But Republic just wants to come together, unite Americans, and stop this divisiveness. You're not going to find dudes going on rants at Republic. You're not going to find Kamala Harris talking about, I need to bring equity into my hurricane relief funds. We're not bringing Joy Reid into this. We're talking about people with common sense values, traditional American values that love this country and want to move past from the divisive narratives and propaganda from the media, from the political class. It's an us versus them, and Republic's trying to capture that moment. It's not left and right necessarily, although communist left it is. It's just an us versus them. It's regular Americans that want to take their country back.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. So the website, if you want to check it out, is republic.us. It's still kind of in the beta phase, so have some patience with it. But you go on there, you enter your city, your state, your zip, and we're building a network of content creators that do nationwide pieces down to local pieces. You can find your local politicians on there. They're building out the content where you can have like reviews of how they did or what their positions are. But the overarching theme is let's take America and let's take all the issues. So take something like abortion off the table. We're not going to agree it's a state's issue. Secure borders, we should all be able to agree on. We can all see how disastrous that is. Out of control government spending, we can see how bad that is. Forever wars, we can see how bad that is. election integrity, regardless of who you think wins. Every American should feel comfortable that their vote was tabulated correctly and validated and verified, so that if Trump wins, if Kamala wins, both sides can put their head on the pillow and say we had a safe and secure election, not my person won or their person lost. And that's what the left did in 2020. They said, oh, because they were the biggest proponents of there was election fraud in 2016. But because their person won in 2020, they're like, oh, no, this was perfectly clean. And we need to get past that, because if Americans can't trust processes like their election, like, the country's doomed. We'll never be able to peacefully coexist, because we'll just think they're shenanigans. And I got to say, I go back to 2012. Like, I look at some of those results in 2012 and I go, I really wish somebody would have looked into this and explained to me how these numbers happened, how they happened, because some of those didn't look real to me.
I think we only get censored talking about the 2020 election, so maybe we should do a deep dive in the 2012.
Yeah, I liken it to Barry Bonds and Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa for the baseball fans out there. Like, when the year came and all of a sudden their head grew 4 sizes and they were hitting, 500-foot home runs and hitting 70 home runs. And you just look at those numbers and go, something's weird.
The Barry Bonds head thing is pretty hilarious, but I know that's not what we're trying to talk about.
Right. But the point I'm making is, when you see some of these statistical anomalies, like, American citizens just want to know, like, what's the deal with
Well, and when you look at recent news, Jason, about how the Biden-Harris administration's DOJ is suing states like Alabama for trying to remove people that aren't eligible to vote from their voter rolls, when Democrats in D.C. vote to not have the SAVE Act, which is making sure that you're an American citizen when you vote, it's almost like they want there to be some wiggle room in the elections. Call me crazy.
This morning, so we're filming this on Tuesday, I was reading an article the Hill put out. So Georgia passed a rule that said, okay, we're going to count all the ballots electronically, and then we're going to verify them by hand. So we're going to do electronic ballot counting for speed, and then we're going to verify them by hand. Me as a citizen, I'm like, well, that makes great sense. No matter who wins, you can at least, have a verified count.
That's it.
And the Hill was calling it like radical election stuff designed to suppress the vote. And that was a headline. I'm like, read, like, God, did Republicans come up with something crazy? And literally the line from there was, after the ballots are electronically counted, they want a hand verification of the ballots. And I'm thinking, what's wrong with that? Like, I don't get it.
It's almost like they want to be able to cheat. Like, how else is a normal person supposed to look at that and say, you want to be able to cheat? Is that what I'm getting from this?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, on Patrick Bet David's podcast this week, he had a guy on there who hacked an election.
Yeah, like 5 seconds, didn't he? He just like opened his laptop and went like, boom, I'm in the election machine.
Right. Yeah. Which Democrats actually did that in 2016, where they were testimony like, look how easy these are to hack. Rah. Ugh, crazy. Well, I think this might be wrapping up our part of the podcast. So hopefully, folks, this is where you get to see how
the fingers crossed moment, folks. Either this show is going to end on your feed, or it's going to continue with me sitting down with Colonel Douglas Macgregor. We're going down to Orlando. We're going to try to sit down with him. We want you to hear from them themselves about what is Republic and how do we get our country back on track.
Well, Colonel Macgregor, we appreciate you coming on the show today, and we want to talk about Republic a little bit and how we can save this country and get it back on track. As I look at Republic, I think about America First values, and I can't help but think that there's a MAGA movement behind that, even though this is an apolitical organization. And it gets me wondering, how do you bridge the divide to Democrat voters that have not yet seemed to have woken up to the fact that we're losing this country, but they're still solidly voting for Democrat?
I think that's an enormously important question. And I don't think there's an easy solution, but I think we can do the following. First of all, I've stopped almost entirely talking about Republicans and Democrats. I almost always universally talk about the uniparty on the basis of simply facts, that on most bad legislation, there's more than sufficient support from both parties to pass it. So if you don't like policies that are coming out of Washington, you can't pin it all on one party. Now, certainly, You can make the argument that many of the things that Biden has done, I mean, he's responsible for injecting, $11 trillion of debt into the system in just 4 years. I mean, that's incomprehensible. We talk about how many years we've existed as a nation and how much debt is piled up. That's more than the debt we had over most of our history. And there's no easy way to deal with it anymore because we don't think we can retire it. But don't waste your time blaming Republicans or Democrats. It's this cabal of people. That's the first thing. The second thing, I think, is to make the point that Democrats are actually good people. We have to stop thinking of people who are Democrats as being universally supportive of all the bad policies when we know they're not. I grew up with people in Philadelphia who were overwhelmingly Democrats. They were absolutely some of the most patriotic and devoted Americans I've ever met. So I know they're out there, and they love the country no less than we do. And then finally, try to talk about the things that unite us. And I think one of the things that unites us is really the Bill of Rights. And we strongly support that. Now, if you want to get into debates about abortion, I think that's a self-inflicted wound. Because I was under the impression that the return of the decision-making to the state level was the end of the discussion. But you do have members of both camps, as well as in the Uniparty, that seem to profit from dividing us along these lines. So I talk about that as settled legislation, end of discussion. Let's move on to other things. I haven't run into very many Democrats that want to keep the borders open. I know they're out there, but I don't think the majority of people see it that way, especially when they begin to figure out that they're losing jobs to these people. And anyone who says that's not true, they don't compete, that's a lot of nonsense. Everybody knows from personal experience where they live that that's not true. So, I think focusing on the things that we can agree on, we don't want to be involved in these mindless interventions overseas. We don't want the federal government instructing our children, telling them how to live, what to think, via a public school system that is more about ideological indoctrination than it is about actually teaching useful skills. Everybody wants education to be a path to employment. Well, then let's get together and make it happen. And then finally, I would say you don't need to mention MAGA all the time. It doesn't mean it's bad, but MAGA conjures up misleading impressions of people. You're not one of those WAGA people. And then you say, well, what's a MAGA person? And this committed leftist has all sorts of crazy ideas about what it is, and it's not. So, that's about as far as I can go. But that's what I try to do when I speak to people.
I think that's a great point, and a powerful reminder that 80-90% of this country wants the same thing. And without trying to demonize a Democrat voter, and then I look at the Kamala Harris administration putting out policies that promote open borders, LGBTQ activism, a nanny state, endless wars overseas, and we'll get to Ukraine in just a second. When you look at a voter and say, this is what you're voting for, am I wrong to say that they're misguided, or what are they operating under? What's the framework for a Democrat voting that way?
I think some Democrats don't understand what it means. When you say open borders, it really does mean open borders. That means that people, millions of people, can march into the country, fly into the country, sail into the country, without really being carefully vetted. We don't know where they came from, who they are, what they want. Now, we do know what they want in the sense that in most cases, they want to enrich themselves at our expense. When they're paid enormous sums of money, and sometimes the payment comes in the form of free accommodations in the best hotels, and all you have to do is walk outside, look at the numbers of people who are hopeless, many of whom are veterans. And I don't think Democrats don't care about those things, but they may not have carefully thought through what it's all about. I was watching recently some film footage from Chicago, and people in Chicago, particularly in, we say, African-American or black neighborhoods, are utterly furious at what's happening because they're the victims of crime perpetrated by people that are here illegally, and they're losing jobs to illegals. There's on the one hand, the left often wants to attack business. Well, if they're going to attack business, let's attack business for the right thing, which is you hired these people illegally, business should be punished for it. And if you're a repeat offender, we should liquidate the business. Now, people think, oh, well, that's a bit too much. Everything's too much until there's not enough food to go around, until law and order break down. Then suddenly nothing is too much. We'd rather not get to that point. But, when we were talking earlier about the debt and the destruction of our credit and all these kinds of things, that we're going to end up there.
It seems that way. It
Yes.
seems without intervention, that's where we're ending up for sure. And then it makes me wonder, you see that, I can see that, millions of Americans can see that. Voters might not understand the issues, they might not be thinking down the road that line, but certainly the elites, certainly the establishment has thought this through. Is this what they want? Is this what is their end game?
Well, when you say the establishment has thought it through, the establishment harbors a lot of illusions. First of all, most of the establishment doesn't see the world that you and I live in. They're remote from it. Visit Washington, visit Capitol Hill. It's a magnificent bubble that is completely divorced from the reality beyond the Beltway. Now, some of them will say, well, I go back to my area at least several times a year, so I'm in touch. Really? Well, that may be true for many. I don't think it's true for all of them. And then what do they listen to? You see, this is the problem with donor-based policymaking. And that's really what goes on. You know, I'd really like to support, this because I think most of my constituents like it. But the donor is offering me enormous sums of money in my reelection campaign, as well as other benefits that I can't discuss if I go along with this. And, ultimately, since that's not really directly involving my constituents, it's happening overseas or in another state, I guess that's okay. Let's just say people who are actually interested in their constituents and this country preeminently. That's tough. There's a book by a former congressman from Colorado named Buck. I can't remember his first name, but Congressman Buck wrote a book called The Swamp is Deeper Than You Think. And he has a magnificent chapter at the beginning that describes what he discovers as a congressman when he arrives. The first thing he's told is that you're going to have to raise $200,000, $300,000, whatever it is, for the Republican National Committee. That has to happen. So you need to start thinking about that. Secondly, you're going to have to raise this much money if you want to join the Banking and Finance Committee. You have to raise this much money if you want to be on agriculture. In other words, you're buying your way into the policymaking process. You're trying to buy a seat on a particular committee. And, he said, well, listen, I don't have that kind of money. I'm not a millionaire. Well, that's why you go right out back here, the K Street lobbyists. That's where you go and get your money. Well, who's got all the money? Just think about that. The people that are driving your policy. So you've got to go literally and beg for money from Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, any number of just the Israel lobby. There are other lobbies. People talk about the Israel lobby. It's not the only one. There are others. It's just extraordinarily well financed. And you find out if you're willing to do the things that they want you to do, in other words, support the policies that they deem to be essential to their interests, then you get money. Then you turn around and you give a lot of that money back to the leadership in the House or the Senate, and it goes back to the party headquarters, at least in theory. You still keep a great deal, but not as much as you think you would normally get. How do you beat this system? And the only thing I can think of right off the top of my head is bankruptcy. When people don't have the money to buy you, then you can't be bought. And then a lot of people who really are only serving with the object in mind of making themselves wealthy while they serve, they're probably going to lose interest. I know that sounds rudimentary and silly, but I think there's a lot of truth in it. An awful lot of people run for office, and you say, why would this attorney who owned a couple of McDonald's restaurants and a dry cleaning chain or something suddenly sell all of it, convert it to cash, and then run for Congress? Well, first of all, he's already made a couple of $1 million. He finances his own campaign. He gets there, and he now has access to all other potential pots of income, depending upon where he's from. I mean, if you live in Dallas or Fort Worth or any of these places, what kinds of industries do you have in those areas? We have a lot of defense industries. And if you live close to an installation where you may have Fort Hood in your district or, Andrews Air Force Base or something, all these things are potential cash cows, depending upon how you're willing to behave and vote. It's not supposed to be that way, but that's the way it is.
As you describe that, and it's even worse than we thought, I think the old axiom was that politicians' number one job was to get reelected, but you're making it sound far worse than just getting reelected here. You're doing the bidding of corporate interests.
I think it has to be understood as as an enormous problem that is simply not easily solved under current circumstances. Who, if you are in a particular district, and in that district, let us say they mine uranium, and the people that own and operate that business that sell to the United States government and to other private sources that fuel things like radiation, what is it, X-ray machines and all these kinds of things. You have a keen interest in that particular industry because a lot of people that live in your district work there. So the money that comes to you is a natural consequence of those two factors. You were elected to represent those people. What if the uranium mine is closed because somebody discovers an alternative source of fuel that is not as deadly for other purposes? Just as a hypothetical. Well, are you going to go along with that, or are you going to fight to keep it open? We have right now, I think, 7 or 8 operating naval shipyards. The truth is that we can really only afford to keep 3, maybe 4 operating. Yet we're talking about 7 or 8. Why? Well, because you have a lot of people that work in those yards. You have a lot of major defense industries invested in those things. And so you're continually subsidizing these places to keep them open, whether it is you're rewarding them for something they're going to do for the Defense Department or they're being rewarded for supporting some deal overseas. It doesn't matter. In other words, you can't expect the people that have these things in their districts in Mississippi, Southern California, Maine, and other places, Connecticut. You can't expect them to vote against something that is really a source of their, or a reason for their existence, as a source of income. That's why we made the Senate, and then we have the House. The Senate is supposed to be somewhat removed from that. As it turns out, that's failed miserably. Remember, it was Teddy Roosevelt who decided to throw the Senate open to popular election on the grounds that would make it more responsive as a democratic institution of the American people. Boy, has that failed. Because in his day, he was angry with the railroads and the mining interests and oil and steel and everything else that were dominating policy making in the Senate. Well, big money is big money. How do you cope with that? The only other way is to have a very strong executive. But everybody's afraid of a strong executive. So you have this vacillation between the houses of Congress and the presidency. And then in the middle, you've got the court. I think, to be frank, we're dealing with a government that was designed in the 1780s. And that structure was designed to last 20 years. We're in the same structure. And it hasn't been ineffective, but it hasn't been very effective either. And certainly until you get to World War I, really in the early part of the 20th century, it didn't matter. What was the contribution of gross national product of the federal government before World War I? 1%, 1.2%. What portion does it represent today, if we're going to be honest? Is it a third? Probably larger. Depends on how you calculate it. That's enormous. Government spending has become indispensable in governing this country and everyday life. And you sit around and say, well, we want the government to do X, Y, and Z. 100 years ago, very few people said those things.
It wouldn't even have crossed your mind. I need the government to come in and take care of me.
But now there's an expectation the government's going to come in and solve everything. Well, when you finally decide to make the government solve everything, guess what happens? They don't solve very much. That's what made Reagan, popular. Did he change it? No. Did he make a big difference? In my judgment, no. But he certainly made himself popular by saying the most dangerous words in the English language are, I'm the U.S. government, I'm here to help you, or something. So I don't know how you wind back that clock, but bankruptcy certainly will help. But then you have to reevaluate how you govern everything. We can't do that here in this discussion, but tuck that away, because at some point we're going to have to face those things.
People will start to think about that. They'll have to think about that, right?
And then you have states like Pennsylvania. If you take Philadelphia and Pittsburgh out of the equation in Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania would be one of the reddest states in the nation. As soon as you put Philadelphia and Pittsburgh into it, it's almost blue. And lately it's been blue. Now, immigration is also part of that equation. That's, we all understand that, if you can't convince people to vote for the left that already live here, well, what do? You recruit people from overseas to come in that you can then make voters for you.
Generations of voters. In Minnesota, where I'm from, if you get a driver's license, you are automatically registered to vote as an illegal immigrant, even though the laws on the books say that no illegals shall vote.
Yeah.
So that's where we're at this point.
Minnesota's not unique. We have the problem in Florida. Even though they do make the distinction, and the state constitution says you must be a U.S. citizen to vote, it doesn't make any difference. What happens is under the motor voter legislation, that roll of people that are registered to drive automobiles that have gone through the administrative process are rolled over into ballots.
Yep.
So now how do you separate them out? And you have all the resistance to that, which is astonishing to me.
And I didn't quite realize how deep this ran. Oklahoma cleaned up its voter rolls, and they removed 500,000 voters that used to be eligible in a state with just 4 million people. So you're looking at 1 out of 8 voters on that roll got removed, and then you start to wonder, that's in a deep red state. How prevalent, how widespread is this problem? And it calls into question the veracity of every election we've had. And
for a long time.
You come to the conclusion that you're not supposed to be able to audit the election. You're not supposed to know the actual truth about the election outcomes.
Well, you can't audit the Department of Defense either. Right. And perhaps you're not supposed to be able to audit the Department of Defense, so that the money that goes into that black hole is squirreled away in a number of different places that, if a good auditor found it, there might be questions as to why did we do this. It's an enormous problem. Philadelphia, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, St. Louis. We just go down the list of all these big multi-million person cities, and it's almost the same everywhere. One party rule. Well, if you've got one party rule, there is no accountability.
No. There's only one incentive, and that's to stay in power.